Well, writing to me is the state of being happy because though it is filled with anxiety, with self doubt, unpredictability, and lots of negative energy, when you face rejections, I feel writing is one of the only things that makes me really happy. I'm really in a very euphoric state of mind when I'm writing. When I mean that's the best phase for me because after that it is completely dependent on the publisher, right? Once you send your work or the editor. So I think I like having control over my work. So as long as I'm working on a creative piece, I really, really enjoy that process. So writing is happiness for me anytime. It is something that keeps me going. And storytelling, creativity, I feel, I always associate them with memorable characters. So for me, a good story is always a character driven story, right? So if I'm really, really drawn to a character, for me, that story is something that will stay with me forever. So one example I'd like to give is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I really, really love that story because those three characters, right, the three childhood friends, I can never forget them because of the dynamics that they share, because of the shared experiences that they go through, and in just the way Ishiguro was able to catch the nuances of friendship, of love through that story. I absolutely love it. Another book is The Kite Runner, because I love the friendship between Amir and Hasan, and it's a story that I can never ever forget because I am generally drawn to stories about friendship, about love, but also because of the way the characters experience it, right? Because every character goes through a unique experience, and that's something that I love to create as a writer as well, right? If a reader is able to relate, or if a reader just loves the character for the way they are, I think that's it. That's what makes a good story. And creativity to me also means risk taking, because unless you experiment or unless you really go out there and probably write the dark, ugly stuff that comes to your mind, I don't think you are really trying to be creative. Because if you're trying to be safe, if you're trying to play according to the rules set out there, it might not be the best version of you, right? What I mean is you have a certain potential, right? If you don't try, if you don't try to explore the depths of that potential, what's the point? So I think creativity also means experimenting, taking risks. So a lot of writers I speak to say that how do I find my voice, right? How do I develop a style? But I also think it's a trap because a lot of writers end up writing the same things over and over again, which is not wrong, which is not bad, but it just means that you're restricted. You should write things that move you out of your comfort zone. You should try things or try genres that people might not know you for, right? It is definitely a risk and it's definitely a personal choice, but I feel that is creativity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Michelle DaCosta. Michelle is a writer and currently works as the managing editor at Bound. She was born and raised in Bahrain and has previously worked in corporate as a HR executive. She co-hosts the author interview podcast Books and Beyond with Bound. Her fiction and poetry can be found in several journals like Litero UK, Out of Print, the Bombay Literary Magazine, and many more. She's been published in over 50 literary magazines. Her poetry was longlisted for the Toto Award for Creative Writing in 2021, and she just had her debut poetry chapbook published by Yavanika Press in 2021 as well. Tune in as she shares her journey of finding writing as her passion, her favorite authors and books, and much more. So, hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I have with me this week Michelle DeCosta. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. I'm really excited to be here.
And I'm really excited to talk to you. A small disclaimer for the listeners. Well, not a disclaimer, but something I really want to share is that Michelle was actually one of my mentors when I was working at Bound. So this episode is really special for me. And I'm just so happy and grateful to be here talking to you. So thank you so much, Michelle, for being here.
That's so sweet, Sangeeta. Yeah, it was really fun working with you too.
So, yeah, I think, just to kind of dive in, as I mentioned in your intro, you're the managing editor at Bound. You've been published in over like 50 literary magazines and whatnot. So I think just kind of really going from the beginning, what is your earliest memory of writing and realizing that, this is something you enjoy doing?
Oh, wow. Okay, so that takes me on the stripped down memory lane. So actually, Sangeeta, people think I'm an avid bookworm and I've always been one, but it's not true. Like I got into reading quite late in life, like at least later than my friends, right? So earlier, when I was in the first grade or second grade, my friends were already reading. And I thought, oh my God, what a boring thing to do, you know. But then once I got into it, there was no stopping, right? So I think it was in my 7th or 8th grade, right? I was really hooked to these Goosebumps series by R.L. Stine. I absolutely loved them and loved them to an extent where I was in awe of the writer's capability to just, I would say, entertain the readers, right? And I thought, okay, I should be like this. And I was, I think, so obsessed at that point that, I started writing similar stories. Wherever I could, right? I mean, it could be like on a notepad, it could be in a book or whatever. But I remember writing similar stories, right, with monsters and campfires and all of that.
Wow.
And because I really wanted to have that effect on a reader, and because there were no other readers or writers in my family. So I would say I felt that connect with the writer. There was a kind of, I would say, a very deep connection like the writer and the reader has just through the words. So I wanted to have that kind of relationship with my readers, and I was so desperate to publish at that point. I remember I was creating small books of my own, like just patching pages together and hoping that I could just give it to a printer and just to see my name on the book jacket. So yeah, it's so funny if you think about it.
But that's really cool. I mean, I don't think 7th or 8th grade is that late, honestly speaking. I think it's pretty early, in my opinion, because you're doing some incredible work. But, having said that, you got into reading and you mentioned R.L. Stine and Goosebumps, then, I'm kind of wondering, what are the stories or other stories that have really impacted you, stayed with you, and really, inspired you to attempt writing? Yes, Goosebumps is there, but have there been any other writers or, even just books or films or TV shows that, the stories have really just like wowed you and you're like, oh my God, I wish I could write something like this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, and especially now where there's this content boom, right? Like no matter what platform it is, be it audios, videos, or books, right? I think I just love consuming stories, right? It doesn't matter where it comes from. So the first stories that I was introduced to, were obviously not through books, but, my parents love telling stories, right? Like, how generally parents share, anecdotes from their life. I think that's how I realized that I like stories, right? It doesn't matter where it comes from. So they kept telling me stories about, growing up, and it was a very different life from, the life that I lived. So I really like knowing about people or their lives, which were different from mine, right? So for example, my father grew up in Mangalore, which was a very rural life. Like he was, he used to play outdoors, and I had a very indoor life. It was quite different. So I loved that. I loved, thinking from another character's point of view, for example. And the first stories that I liked were the Disney fairy tales that I watched. Like, I don't know if other 90s kids also grew up on that, but I used to watch them like back to back. Like every time I would have my meals, right, as a kid, I would watch them like Beauty and the Beast or Snow White, Little Mermaid, all of them, right?
So, I think that's where I realized I love stories, right? It doesn't matter what format, but then of course the written word is an entirely different world. I started, really appreciating well-written sentences. And I think the first writers that I was exposed to, because our library had, for example, Goosebumps,
Right.
Sidney Sheldon, Nancy Drew.
Wow. Yeah.
Those were the first stories that I was, exposed to. And then I remember reading The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri one day, and I wasn't really conscious of this her celebrity status. I mean, it's only now that I realize that she's a very well-known writer throughout the world, right? But what I loved about that story was, of course, though it was about a Hindu immigrant couple in the US,
right.
It was the first time I realized that yes, life is different for people who leave India, right? So my parents left and they came to Bahrain. I was born and raised in Bahrain, right? So until then, I kind of, took my life for granted, right? Like, I mean, that's what we do because that's our lived reality. We don't question it. We don't think, oh, there might be some struggle that my parents might be going through. I don't think, it comes naturally to kids. Because your parents do their best to give you that kind of life, right? But, that was when I read that book, for the first time I realized, my parents didn't have support. Like if you're in India, you're surrounded by people you love and it's easier, right? I'm not saying it's very easy. Definitely parenting and working, 9 to 5 is difficult everywhere. I'm sure. But what I mean is that story made me realize that, immigrant stories or migrant stories need to be told, right? They are different. So that book, and after that, I think, I just kept reading whatever I could get my hands on, right? So I love contemporary work. And I would say so many female writers' work really stood out to me. So, for example, Elena Ferrante, her work is, I mean, I was mind blown when I read The Days of Abandonment, right? And I keep telling my students, like I discuss her work a lot in my classes, and I keep telling them that it's a very simple tale, right? It's not rocket science. It's not, something, it's not outer space, right? What I mean is it's a very simple tale about domestic life, yet it's so impactful. I think for me, that's what I really enjoy in stories, right? So stories about ordinary life, right? Like they say, slice of life kind of writing. But when a writer does that well, I think I'm mind blown, right? It's I think it's more difficult to write about ordinary things than, I think things that are probably out of your comfort zone.
One's taste evolves, right? The more you visit different places, the people you meet, the events you attend. So when I had gone to Bangalore for higher studies, that's where I was introduced to different writers, like, Northeastern writers, like, Jahnavi, Barua, Janice, Pariat, Anjum, Hasan. Very, very refreshing, interesting work. I think when I started reading Indian writers, more contemporary Indian writers, that's when I realized, that you can develop or build your own voice. Because, of course, while reading Western writers, you do understand how stories have evolved over the years, but then it's also kind of repetitive, right? So I prefer reading South Asian writers. I prefer reading African writers to help me understand how to, use our unique voice and blend it in your work. So, for example, Konkani is my mother tongue. So, how to use that in poems, in prose, so that people really get an idea of who I am, my identity. So that is something that reading these works really helped me.
No, definitely. I completely agree and resonate with that, because I think one story, and I keep talking about this, is like, for me, which really stayed with me, was Little Women. And that's it's literally about this family and, this mother and these 4 sisters, kind of living their life, figuring their way in America. It's just insane to see, the way, how that story still resonates today, because it's just basic human emotions. It's so simple. It's still the same things we're facing, which is so insane. So I completely resonate.
Exactly. Yeah. So, talking about how a story written in another time period resonates till now, I was just reminded of Revolutionary Road, by Richard Yates. though people say it talks about a certain time period, it talks about living in the suburbs, right? Of course, every book has its own themes and all of that. But I feel that book captures, the feeling or this kind of, anxiety in life even today. So
Right.
I would say that's one of those stories that has stayed with me. So it started with, watching the adaptation, which
Wow.
is very
Okay.
famous because of the famous Titanic couple. It was kind of like a comeback for them, but that was not the reason why I liked it, right? The story really stood out to me, and then I read the book, and then I keep recommending his writing to whoever I come across, because I feel he's a little underrated writer. Like, usually you hear of these white writers, the canon and all of that, but I think Richard Yates has not been given, I would say, as much importance as he deserves. So I
Okay.
really love his work.
Yeah, that's a book I'm definitely going to check out. I've not read any of his work, so that's something I will definitely add
Yeah,
to
you
my
should.
reading list.
Yes.
But yeah, I think just to kind of, pivot a little bit, because, you mentioned the namesake in Jhumpa Lahiri, and, there was
Yes.
this resonance where you spoke about, your parents immigrating and actually then understanding that, oh, this is what it may have been like for them. I wonder, was it because I would assume for you also while growing up, it must have been like a very third culture kid situation, right? So, what was, I guess, identity like for you in terms of fitting in and finding your space? Because obviously you were living away from India in Bahrain,
Right.
in another place altogether, and then kind of figuring out how you fit in or your identity. What has that been like for you? And even just shifting back to India and again kind of finding your identity, if I can ask that question.
Mm. Oh, yes. I think that's a very interesting question. Nobody has, asked me that till now. So I think, surprisingly, Sangeeta, I never felt I was away from India. I know it feels, it sounds like, oh my God, but the thing is, see, in the Gulf, or especially in Bahrain, when I lived there
Hmm.
were lots of Indians. Lots, I
Okay.
mean, to an extent where you feel you're in India. So, for example, I studied in Indian school. I studied the CBSE syllabus.
Okay.
All Almost all of our teachers were Indians, right? Majority, I'll say, Mallus from Kerala.
Wow. Okay.
And it was yeah, and so I think that's where I never kind of felt that gap. I never felt
Okay.
like I was really away from my country, because I was always surrounded by Indians, right? Neighbors are Indians, your classmates are Indians, everyone is an Indian, right? And there's a lot for expats over there. So, for example, there are a lot of
Okay.
clubs, right? So, ethnic clubs. I mean, I was never a
Hmm.
part of it. People, for example, from a certain place would be. So, there's like the Punjab Club or the Goan Singers Club, all of that. So what expats do is, they get together on the weekends. They have this kind of, I would say, bonding sessions where
Right.
you don't feel left out. Yeah, but for me, yeah, I never felt that. And also, we used to watch a lot of Bollywood, right? So we had this
Okay.
channel, 55. Okay, so there was this local channel, but they would air a Bollywood movie every Wednesday because of
Wow.
the crowd.
Okay.
Like they are like a huge expat population. Um, and there was a whole radio station also in Hindi. So the thing is, I felt so connected to it. Like, I learned Hindi just by watching Bollywood movies, and
Wow.
Hindi, Marathi. They were things I studied in school, and people are surprised sometimes, especially I think Catholics. Maybe probably they don't speak Hindi as well, right?
Yeah.
As well as others. But whenever I speak in Hindi, people say, "Oh my God, how do you know Hindi?" Because you were not even born and raised here. But yeah, so I think that's how it is for expats in the Gulf, at least. Like, I'm not sure about other Western countries,
Yeah.
but in the Gulf, I can definitely say that the expat population is a lot. Yeah.
Okay. That's incredible. And then, shifting back to Bombay, then I would assume would have
Hmm.
been, I guess, easy in a sense for you. Because
Um,
I'm assuming, or was it tough? Did you feel like an outsider when you came and,
so that actually, I'll tell you what I was really worried about. Okay, so one thing is, Bombay and Bahrain is a complete contrast in terms of pace. Okay,
right,
so
right.
while Bahrain is very laid back, while it's
Okay.
very slow, so I mean, people love to just, I I would say, do their work, go to work, finish their 9 to 5 job, and then relax, right? That's the kind of atmosphere or work-life balance, if you can call it, that's there. But in Bombay, I think, life never pauses. That is something I realized when I came here. And one thing I really dreaded were the local trains, because I've heard really scary stories about, accidents that happen. Yeah, like even just like trying to board a train is really scary, right? So you might slip or you might whatever. Yeah. Like, I don't want to get into all those, gory stories that you hear. But the thing is, I dreaded that. Okay. But, I didn't expect to make that shift. Right. So, but I think a lot of people don't know that, the Gulf doesn't give you citizenship despite having lived there for a lifetime, which is sad. Right. Like, I mean, I can imagine, because they have such a huge expat population, they can't really give everyone citizenship, but it is very different from the West. So in the West, of course, you stay for a few years. There are certain criteria you need to meet, right? Yeah. But in the Gulf, it doesn't happen. So I knew that my parents were retiring. I knew they were leaving, and I didn't want to stay without family. Right. So when I was thinking about applying for HR jobs, which was a natural progression. I thought, okay, like after this, I'll have to go for HR jobs. But in a way, I felt that, if I don't take the plunge now, when will I? You always, you feel like, okay, let me just try, let me just see. And then I just came across this vacancy that Bound had posted actually on Facebook. You know how sometimes you're just scrolling mindlessly on Facebook and other places. And at that point, Facebook was pretty active. So I just came across this and I was actually in touch with Tara. She's the founder of Bound. Yeah. And I was in touch with her. She had published some of my interviews in Jotted. So we were in touch and I just applied. I thought, okay, why not? Despite my fear of local trains and all that. Because, the work, like my workplace was just 5 minutes away from my place in Bahrain. Okay. And over here, it is pretty much like the office. Bound's office was like at the other end of Bombay. I had to like literally travel for like an hour or two to reach there. So I'll say that the transition or that initial phase was definitely difficult, like for me to figure out local trains and all of that. But then, I feel that it's that it's the mindset at the end of the day. It's that zeal, it's that enthusiasm. If you want to do it, if there's a will to do it, I think you can do it.
That's very well said, and I completely agree. If you do have the will to do it, you definitely can. And then talking about your shift to Bombay and Bound, how did you decide to make the switch from a corporate career in HR to being managing editor at Bound? Because I feel like making a career switch in general can be quite tricky and challenging and also scary to some degree, and especially jumping from corporate to creative it can be quite a different ball game altogether. So how did you decide to just take that decision, and what has that transition and journey been like for you?
So like I mentioned earlier, I just noticed the vacancy. But the thing is, Sangeeta, my first job, right, like my first proper job, which was not an internship, was in media. So I had actually applied for HR jobs, but it was a really bad time in Bahrain, recession, all of that. There were no openings. Okay. So I came across this vacancy actually, and it was Bahrain's national newspaper, right? They wanted people for their online team. I applied and I got in, and I was working there, almost for a year. But then, after a point, you feel, okay, you want growth. And then I was also thinking about my education, right? So you invest 5 years into a certain degree or into a certain field. And I studied BCom and MBA. So I was wondering, okay, should I give it a shot? Like I wanted to give it a shot. I wanted to try working in HR. So I applied, and luckily I got, I would say good exposure, because it was a generalist role. I think in general, my personality is such where, you just do one thing and you get bored, right? You want to do multiple things. And I think that gives you a good, I would say it's a good stepping stone. Because when you do multiple things in a field, that's when you realize what you really like. So for example, I was into training, recruitment, different fields in HR. So I worked there for around 3 years. And after that, like I said, I knew we were leaving. I knew we were leaving Bahrain. And of course, HR there and HR here is completely different. So I had my own, doubts. I had all of that. So then I, came across this vacancy and I applied. Now the thing is, as I said, there's this feeling, right? If I don't try right now, when will I get a chance? So the thing is, I've always been into this. So I've been writing, I've been, applying for voluntary positions as readers in magazines. I've edited at magazines. So these were all, stuff that I did out of my love for reading and writing. I wanted experience. Right. So I always did that on the side. So I would come back after my work and then, resume all of this. That literally kept me going.
Wow.
But then I thought, why not do it as a day job? Because it's a completely different thing, right? I wanted to try it out. I wanted to see, okay, what is it? What is a professional life in the creative field, So, and I heard there were a lot of applications. So I was really thrilled that, when I got the job, and I'll say that, my parents supported me a lot, like as in I live with family. So that kind of, I would say, support system is very important. So that way my transition was easier. Tara was very supportive. My parents were supportive. So I feel that, it's up to you. It's a choice you make. So yes, it was risky. I would not doubt that. And of course, and it's a startup, right?
Yeah.
Also, people were telling me that, isn't that risky? I said, see, if you think about it, anything in life is risky.
That's
but
true.
You make a choice.
Yeah,
you make a choice, So I think that's what, that's, I think, a very conscious choice that I took. And if it hadn't worked out, I would have probably gone back to HR. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But that is something that I wanted to try out for myself, Yeah.
And more power to you, because you are thriving, as I think we can all see.
Thank you. It's so sweet of you.
Yeah, it's really incredible, because I always, find it inspiring to hear from people who just, suddenly decide to switch career paths and then, are doing amazingly well. And it's really inspiring to see you do that, Michelle. You're like a live example of that. And I'm sure like people...
Thank you.
Really, I really mean that. I think people listening to this, if there's anyone out there who needs that nudge to maybe just kind of, try something else, this could be that much needed nudge. So thank you for being here and doing this.
Life is short. I think that is something that people should remember, I don't mean, live irresponsibly, live erratically. That's not what I mean. But, do something that you love. Like, I mean, you don't want to, turn 50, 60 and then regret not having tried that. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh yeah, for sure. But, again, coming to that, because I would assume that now, because you are like managing editor, you're in this creative field, so to speak. I feel like a lot of people just think it's all glamour sometimes, and they don't realize there are a lot of other things that come with it. So, having said that, what are some misconceptions people have about being in a creative job? And have there specifically been any misconceptions about the work you do?
Right. Yeah, of course. I mean, for me also, when I got into the job, I didn't know what it's going to be like, right? Because it was my first exposure. So something I figured along the way is that a lot of people think you need a degree in the arts, right? Like, I mean, in any field, right? You think you need to be qualified. But honestly, what I've noticed, especially in the creative field, it's more about temperament. It's more about passion. It's more about your willingness to learn, right? So another example that comes to mind is Sayantan Ghosh, who is the commissioning editor at Simon & Schuster India, right? So his background is also into commerce and business, right? Like, I mean, he's not somebody who has a degree in the literary field. So what I mean is, of course, that these are exceptions, right? Most of the people in the industry do have degrees. But what I mean is, I feel it's much more than that, right? A degree will only do so much for you.
Right.
You have to have that willingness to learn and to get your hands dirty. So another misconception is, it's all about reading and writing. No, it's not. Like, and especially with Bound, the thing is, it's such a small team. We've each of us have, done everything. It's kind of like, you have to get your hands into marketing, into accounting, into, different fields. And that's where, my background helped, because I was not from a typical arts background, and I'm generally that person who loves to do multiple things. It just, happened, I would say, naturally.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that other people, they're reluctant to do other things, right? Of course, I'm not stereotyping anybody, but I would say that having an open mind definitely helps, because at the end of the day, books require a whole ecosystem, right? Books is not just reading and writing; it's everything that goes into it, right? There's the book cover, there's, the editor who does the work, then there's a designer, right? So it's I would say a whole ecosystem which you
Yeah.
have to be open to. Yeah. And I feel another decision that generally people should make when they decide to move into a creative field is, do you want to just do one thing, right?
Right.
So in a small team,
Hmm.
especially in startups and in small publishing houses, small press, for example,
Hmm.
you get to do everything. Now that
Yeah.
is something you have to decide, right? It's a choice
Definitely.
that
Yeah.
you make. If you move on to a bigger publishing house, you generally have a very what do you say, narrow or a very specific role.
Yeah.
So I feel that if somebody easily gets bored, if somebody cannot just do the same thing day in and day out, then they shouldn't opt for that. So I feel it's
Definitely.
more of a personality trait as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure. And I think very relevant points, because I think, like you said, it's important that people first kind of understand themselves and what it is that they want to do, and
Exactly.
accordingly,
Yes.
make a
No,
call.
and I think but sometimes it's difficult to know that beforehand. So,
Of course, yeah.
why not see, like, through internships, like how like how you worked with Bound. So for
Yeah,
example, just keep looking out for opportunities. I mean, only
definitely.
my point was that, there's only so much you can learn from theory
Of
and from
course.
others' experiences. But
Of course.
unless you do it, you
Yeah.
learn on the job. So unless you do it and figure it out for your own, it's really difficult to tell.
Yeah, definitely. Because I'm very grateful for the opportunity I had with Bound, because I learned a lot, and I think it really opened my eyes to what, the job entails, what the field entails. And
Yeah.
it was great learning. So, like, again, like I said, thank you guys so much for being such great mentors. But but yeah, I think, kind of now moving more towards your side of being published and, writing. You've been published in over like 50 literary magazines, I believe, which is insane. And you're still getting published. But, one of the interesting things I noticed about you is that you also talk about, rejection mails you get from, literary magazines or places or things you've applied for. And I was just wondering, because we're constantly, talking about success and putting your best foot forward and your best image and self out there. Why do you, in such a situation, why do you think it's important to talk about, setbacks or rejection? And do you ever have a fear
Yeah.
that it could, tarnish the image you have as a successful writer?
Oh wow! Oh, thank you firstly for observing. For observing that I do share my rejection. So, see, the thing is, Sangeeta, as a person, I'm quite open, right? I mean, it doesn't matter who the person is or whichever field. I love to be open. I love to be vulnerable, and for me, that is, I would say, the best trait that I find in people, right? And I generally connect with people who are honest, who are vulnerable, right? I don't really like pretending. I don't like faking things, or I don't like connecting with people who are fake, because the thing is, it doesn't help. Okay.
Right.
And one thing I noticed with social media is, come on, let's face it, people do lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I of course, I'm nobody to tell that, people are lying. Of course, it might be their truth, and I'm happy. I'm really happy if the other person is genuinely happy. My point is, if somebody is just projecting a certain kind of life and in reality they're not happy, that doesn't
Yeah.
appeal to me. So what I thought was, why just share acceptances, especially with Instagram and with these platforms where people generally see, oh, all these happy things, and they just become very insecure and anxious. I thought, like, come on, I mean, everyone's life has ups and downs, right? And
Right.
especially with writing, especially with the creative field where it's extremely unpredictable, why do people only share the good stuff?
Yeah.
So I really wanted to share that. I wanted people to know that it's okay. And yes, I mean, I do worry that it will tarnish my image, but I think now I'm more secure, right? Like earlier,
Okay.
when I was starting out, definitely, I would say, oh, what would people think about me? They would just think I'm a bad writer, right? Of course, I do think that, right? Of course, that will always be there. But now I think I'm more secure because I feel, this is something that happens to everybody. It
Right.
happens to even the best of the best writers, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody gets rejected. And I feel by sharing the rejections, people say that, I mean, I've got messages where people say that, thank you for sharing this. It's made my day a little better. And then I felt, because, we all look for validation in a way. I felt really happy that, it is helping people. Yeah, because some people say that, we never wanted to share our rejections because we thought, okay, what will people think of us? But the fact that you are sharing it makes it, normal, kind of like normalizing rejection. So I feel,
Yeah, no, and that's, I completely agree because I think just being open and talking about the setbacks really just helps. And I feel like, especially with writing, I've realized with the whole literary magazine scene and applying, it's almost like this open secret among writers that you will get rejected so many times before getting accepted. But it's so crazy. No one talks about it. It's almost like mental health, where it's like everyone's going through it, but no one's talking about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, I remembered a line that Riya Mukherjee had told me. So she's been very supportive, throughout my career. She had said that you should send out something or submit something with the mindset that you are going to get rejected. So what I mean is, usually people think or expect that they want to be accepted, right? So obviously when you get rejected, there's a disappointment. But she said a writer should never go with that mindset. So expect rejection. So when you get an acceptance, it's a bonus. I think that was a very, it's quite difficult to practice, but it is something I feel that writers should do. It will be helpful. Yeah.
No, for sure. That's very valuable advice. In fact, a fun anecdote that comes to mind is that Douglas Stuart, who's the author of Shuggie, Bain, and who won the Booker Prize in 2020, his manuscript for Shuggie, Bain actually got rejected 44 times before it got published. And it's like his debut novel, which is insane. So I guess it just goes to show you, just take the rejection with a pinch of salt and keep going for sure.
Yeah. No, I think there are lots of stories like that. So I recently, made this poster and stuck it beside my writing desk. So there's this writer I really admire. Her name is Esme Weijun Wong. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she's a writer of The Border of Paradise. And she's also written the collected essays, schizophrenia essays. So now she's pretty famous, but there's a story where her first book was rejected by 41 publishers before being accepted by unnamed press. So I these reminders are very helpful because sometimes you feel you're alone. It is just you. You're that. I would say the weirdest thoughts come to mind when you get a rejection. But these are really good reminders.
Yeah, definitely. Much needed inspiration for, I think, anyone who's trying. But, having said that, you just got published recently. Your chapbook Gulf came out last year. What has that experience been like? Because, that feeling of, oh my God, I'm finally I'm published. I have a book out there, a chapbook out there with my poetry.
Legit book.
which is insane because I think just that, must have been incredible. But seriously, what has the experience been like of just getting published, having your book out there? And has life changed for you after being published?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Sangeeta, because this is something I was thinking about when my book came out. So it came out in August 2021, last year.
Yeah.
And the moment it came out, trust me, I was like, hey, my life is just the same. It was I would say it was a wake-up call because, I would say there's so much pressure, so much hype that writers face. Your debut work has to be this, has to be that. And, it has to come out I would say there's this craze with having your work before under 30. There's so much talk about it. And trust me, nothing changed. I realized that, this is just another stage in my career. Then you move on to another project. Then you move on to another project. It's just all in your head. Okay. And so, even though I'm saying that, yes, I would say it was a very big moment for me because I have received so many rejections for my collection, for my poetry collection. How bad it is for poetry, right? It's kind of the, the underdog. It's there's a hierarchy of work and poetry, comes last, unfortunately, in India, at least. So I tried a lot of places, a lot of rejections, and, I had received acceptances and then it didn't get published, very, I would say, disappointments that came my way, which I didn't expect. Because mostly with poetry, it's small presses that do the work, right? So sometimes they shut down, so there's a lot of, I would say, a lot of other things that fall into place, right? But then obviously at the end, you doubt yourself. You never look at these external factors. You always see, maybe it's me, maybe it's my writing. So I was really happy when, Yamanika Press accepted it. But one thing I wanted to share with everyone is more than the fact of being published, right?
Right.
What I enjoyed was the process of being published. So the editorial process, for example, Yamanika Press has 3 poets themselves, right? I mean, they write poetry in English and they're good editors. So the thing is, I loved that process where they, for example, give me inputs on my poems, right? So they rejected several of my poems, which I'd sent, and they asked me to send new ones. For me, that is most important. I wouldn't want an easy route where people say, oh, you're accepted, chalo, it's published in a month, right? I mean, I am constantly looking for growth. So more than the fact of being published, I loved the whole editorial process from the acceptance to the publication, with working on my poems, with them, spending time and care and really understanding what you're trying to do. You know, because every writer has a certain vision for their work, but sometimes it doesn't match with the publishing house, right? It's as simple as that. And another thing, what I liked about it was, so it's a chapbook that's published, right? A chapbook is not really famous in India, but it's more a Western concept. But what I really loved about that is, it's quality versus quantity.
Definitely.
Which is something I've learned over the years, right? You don't need to publish 100 poems which are mediocre. Probably pick your best. Pick 20 that are your best. So for that way, I would say it's like a portfolio which I'm really proud of, right? And I'll say that, like, I didn't have that wisdom years back when I started. I was really impatient to publish. Like I told you, right? When I was very young itself, I just, wanted to see my name on a cover. It's kind of that obsession that you have. So it's only with time I realized, okay, if you have a good work out, something that you're satisfied with, that is much better than just having, a workout for the sake of it.
Right.
So that way I can say it did work out, but it was quite difficult. I almost gave up on my collection. So this whole journey has taken 5 years, and I think the poems I've been writing for over like 10 years. So it's a very long process. Yeah.
That's insane. That's incredible. But I guess it just goes to show, if you really like put in the work and you really go at it, then, someday there is, light at the end of the tunnel and you might just get your chance, which you definitely did.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's no guarantee. That's one thing you have to keep in mind. There's no guarantee. It can go either way.
Of course.
So, yeah.
No, but it's, again, like, more power to you that you're really like going after your dreams and, you're living them. And I'm sure this is just the first of many to come. I can't.
Thank you. I hope so.
No, I really believe so, because knowing you, I'm sure there will be more to come, and I can't wait to see what comes out. Yeah, but talking about being an author, the other thing is you and Tara run this really cool podcast called Books and Beyond. So for those who may not know what Books and Beyond is, it's this really cool author interview podcast hosted by Michelle and Tara, who's the founder of Bound, where they pretty much talk to different writers and authors about their books, their journeys, and a bunch of other like cool things about their journey. And it's insane because you're on your 4th season now, and Books and Beyond is now in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally, which is insane.
Yes.
Yay! So, and I believe it's been about 2 years or a little more, I think, since the podcast started. So, what has it been like just, from getting this idea of like, hey, let's do something like this, and actually executing it, producing season 1, and now coming to like season 4 and being like this top globally heard podcast? What has that journey been like? And how did you get the idea of starting this?
Oh, wow. So the thing is, as I told you, I've always been into author interviews, right? Tara loved the print interviews that I had done of authors. I used to just publish them on my blog, then they were published on Jotted and other places. So the thing is, I had this curiosity, I had this fascination to speak to other writers, right? Because you only learn when people share. Like I said, I love vulnerable conversations, right? It's like a real talk that you have with writers. So when I joined Bound, we started talking, and then Tara had done a lot of research on podcasts, right? Because podcast back then was a very, very new thing, right? It's not something that people were quite aware of. Nowadays, of course, it's more popular. But back then, there was nothing, right? So she'd done a lot of research. We started talking, and we realized, we have this shared passion for books. Right, it boils down to that. It boils down to how much you're willing to I would say invest, right? Your time, your effort, your money. So that's something we realized we both love to do. So it just started from there, and I say it was very, very difficult. It was a whole new process because I was not used to speaking, or you know what I mean. Like I was a very print person. I used to write a lot. So the voice modulation techniques, or how do you even ask a question, or all of that. Like I would say a lot of practice. A lot of effort, a lot of research has helped. And the fact that, both of us love doing this. That is what has, I think, helped us. And yes, adapting, because firstly, we were recording in a studio in Bandra. And now, we are recording, at least, I think for around 2 years now, we have been recording from home, facing all kinds of glitches online, everything possible. And despite that, keeping it going, because at the end of the day, we love it. That is something I think people should know, that, what I'm trying to say is just your love or your passion for it is not enough. Many things will come in them, right? Definitely. It's a very difficult process when you're trying to do something creative and all of that. And I think just keeping at it.
Yeah, definitely. No, because it's incredible what you've managed to do with the show and, with where it's going today. But, having said that, which have been, I don't know if this is a controversial question to ask, but have there been any favorite author interviews you've had from, Books and Beyond, if you can share a few?
So I'll say that if an interview is challenging in a way which pushes me out of my comfort zone, I enjoy that more. Because, after a point, things do become repetitive, right? How do you still stay interested? How do you still push yourself? So for what I'm trying to say is I'm not picking favorites here. But for example, if there is a genre which I, wasn't avidly reading before, right? So for example, let's say maybe food writing. Okay. Or let's say maybe a business book. Okay. So that is not something probably I would have picked up naturally before. But what I've realized is, because it's through Books and Beyond, because I'm, doing it has opened up a different genre or a whole new field for me. That's where I find it really fascinating, because otherwise, there is a tendency that you become repetitive. You forget to be, there's no innovation. So that way, I'll say I enjoy those episodes more, which are not that familiar to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's something I'm slowly kind of picking up, even with this podcast that I'm doing right now. It's just, I completely agree. You just get exposed to so many different subjects and genres. And I think just every person is so different. The conversations that come out are so different. And there's definitely a lot to take back from that. So completely.
And the more different they are, the more you learn, right? Otherwise, you already know the answers.
For sure. It's always great, I think, to have these conversations. It's sometimes weird also, because when I put the podcast out, it's like, it's a recorded conversation between me and another person. And it sounds kind of creepy, but it's also so educational at the same time, because you're listening in. But it's I love the experience so far. But now that we're kind of coming towards the end of this interview, we always end with these two questions. So the first one is, what are your aspirations? What are you looking forward to in the near or even distant future? Maybe another book, Michelle.
So I am working on some things at the moment, but the thing is, because of my nature, I work on multiple things at a time, right? So I don't get bored. So I really don't know when they'll be complete, or, basically when they would see the light of day. I'm not sure. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in the past few months is, because, I do multiple things at Bound, right? So I've also thought about, okay, what do I really want to do in the future? And one thing I really, really enjoy, like out of all the things, multiple things that we do, is teaching. I've realized that I love guiding writers. I love teaching classes. So if I could do that probably full time in the near future, I'm not sure, I would love to do that as a, full-time thing. Teaching and writing is something I would love to do on a daily basis. Like, because you only have so many hours in a day. You have only so much effort, so much energy you can put into your work. So I feel that is something I would enjoy because, I am contributing in a way to other writers. I've always been supportive for other writers. So I love that. I love that energy that I get when I speak to students. So that and continuing writing. So, poetry, fiction, non-fiction, articles, essays here and there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as someone who's attended Michelle's classes, I can vouch she's an amazing mentor. So if you ever get the opportunity to attend a session by her, please do take it up, really. But yeah, now coming to our last question. What is a piece of advice or learning you'd like to share with people? It can be creative, professional, or something you've just experienced in life and you just wish people were more aware of and knew.
I feel, with advice, people should always do at the end of the day what they want to do, right? People can tell you 100 things, especially with writing advice. You find a lot by famous writers, by celeb writers, but sometimes that might not work for you. So don't be too hard on yourself, because sometimes you don't know. Writers are just, probably they've received a grant. They have all the support possible in the world and they're just writing, but your reality might be very different. Correct?
Right.
So what I mean is advice is also, I think, context related.
Right.
Keeping that in mind, I would say one thing I really want to tell every writer is there's no substitute for hard work.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
There are no shortcuts. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've realized, especially now with our, generation of going viral, of having things which are relevant for the moment, might not stand the test of time.
Right.
It kind of adds to your impatience. So if you're an impatient person in general, it adds to it. Okay. So I feel hard work is something that cannot be substituted.
Yeah.
And because, for example, many people ask me, give me a list of literary journals, for example. And that's something nobody gave me. I spent hours and hours of, just searching the net for names of journals, reading the journals, right?
Right.
And unless you do that, you can't expect something in return, right?
Definitely.
So I know that there are some writers who blindly send out work to journals without having read them. Sometimes they don't even change the name of the editor in the cover letter.
Oh, okay.
So I would say, then you can't expect something
in
return. So definitely that. And another thing is be supportive. See, if you expect, it's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
If you can't appreciate another person's work or support others' work, how can you expect that in return? It's kind of like a give and take thing. And I don't mean give and take as in, just for the sake of networking. Like honestly critiquing their work, vouching for their success, So what I used to do was, for example, if I'm published in a journal, I would read other writers' work who are published in the same issue. I would reach out to them, tell them what I thought of their work. And it was a very natural thing. I never thought about, what will I get in return?
Yeah.
But I'd say that kind of warm atmosphere is something I think writers should cultivate because, it's a small world, right? If we don't support each other, who will? And the arts itself, it's quite a, I think it needs everyone's support.
Definitely.
Possible. And the last thing I think I would say is don't be impatient, which is something I've learned the hard way. I was pretty impatient back then. And I used to think, the number of publications count. I don't think that's the case anymore because honestly, there are lots of journals out there now. I mean, there's no dearth of opportunities, correct? So don't get carried away if you get published in a few journals. I think focusing on quality is more important.
Definitely. Yeah, very, very valuable advice and very relevant. And I think it's something which I think everyone kind of knows, but just keeps forgetting or just overlooks for some strange reason. But it's true. I think just staying patient, staying on track, putting in the work and really, going for it.
Like there are no shortcuts.
Yeah. For sure. Like I completely agree. Much needed. And on that lovely motivational and warm note, we've now come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle.
I wish I could talk to you for longer. I loved it. Thank you so much, Sangeeta.
No, thank you so much for being here. It's really, I'm so grateful and happy we could do this. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I wish you all the best with this podcast and with any other creative, endeavors that you do in the future.
Thank you. So that was my conversation with Michelle DaCosta. I had a lot of fun recording this, and I loved how honest and vulnerable that conversation was. Closing this episode with an excerpt from a short story written and narrated by Michelle. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next week with a new guest and a new chronicle to share. Talk soon!
I'm reading out from my short story titled Flight, which was published in Litro magazine. Courage tries again, in vain, to explain to Eustace that his beloved Muriel is in danger. Eustace kicks him, muttering, "Stupid dog." Courage says, "Oh no, Muriel, I'll save you." I'm watching Courage the cowardly dog and eating cornflakes. Courage lives in the middle of nowhere. Creepy things happen in nowhere, and the narrative always relies on him to save the day. I live on the small island in the Gulf with my parents. I could have been anywhere else, but I'm still here, stuck like Courage. I used to love how Courage always saves the day, saves his family. But I don't think I do anymore. What if Courage could be free from the burden? Muriel and Eustace would be just fine without him. He could walk away anytime he wanted. But no, dogs are loyal, and so are daughters expected to be. Birds are not. We had birds before. I loved them a lot and took care of them. I opened their cage to test their loyalty. I was a fool. But they deserve their freedom, I guess. "Eat your cornflakes before they get soggy," Mom yells from the bedroom. Our living room is flooded with tube light even though it is 8 a.m. Dad and Mom have forbidden me to open the curtains, for perverts lurk everywhere. They stare into homes at young girls using binoculars. Dad has left for work. Mom is almost ready. Her driver will arrive soon. Mom and Dad are hoping I land a relaxing job here after I finish my bachelor's at the university. They don't want me to go through the rigmarole of Indian transportation just to get to and fro from work. I can feel Mom run around the house getting ready for work, but I know her eyes are on me. I finish up the cornflakes before she leaves. She's happy. As a good daughter, I do things to keep my parents happy. Mom watches Savdhan India almost every day and makes me watch it with her. And every single time she says, "Thank God we didn't send you to India. See what happens there." I'm still not allowed to go to the theatre with friends. She says before leaving, "Don't watch TV too long. You have to study, you know, right?" When the lock clicks, I wait for like a minute before I change the channel to Star Movies. I remember to change channels twice before switching off the TV because I know Mom checks the previously viewed channel always. We don't have internet at home. I don't have a mobile phone, but I do read Sidney Sheldon. I switch on my PC and play the free Kellogg's PC game. I toggle left and right to get the milk in the bowl. If I miss, I lose a point. After the TV and PC fail to entertain me for long, I draw the living room curtains with more force than I intended. A curtain ring breaks. I slap my forehead at my stupidity. I pick up the fallen ring and look out. No one's looking at me. I look down at the vegetable shop opposite our building. A housewife bends over the array of veggies on display. She holds a brinjal, inspects it, puts it down and inspects another. While her husband is out at work, what could she be doing at home? Her husband could have left her and the kids in India, but he got them here. Thoughtful of him. Many husbands can't afford to keep their families here and leave them back home. And what do these lonely men do to keep themselves occupied?